Tardes a todos, muchas gracias por su asistencia a esta conferencia que presentará el ingeniero François Corté, retos en la gestión de activos carreteros. Me voy a permitir hacer una breve presentación del ingeniero Corté. Él es ingeniero general de Caminos y Puentes, fue funcionario del Ministerio de Transportes de la Dirección de Infraestructuras Terrestres, dirigió la misión de apoyo por la Red Nacional de Carreteras y esta misión se encargó de definir la política técnica y hacer auditorías de todos los proyectos. Es graduada de la Escuela Politécnica y de la Escuela Nacional de Caminos y Puentes de Francia, así como maestro en Ciencias de la Universidad de California en Berkeley. Trabajó en el Laboratorio Central de Caminos y Puentes desde 1977 hasta finales del año 2001. Ahí dirigió varios equipos de investigación en geotécnica y después en pavimentos. Fue redactor y editor de numerosas guías que definen la doctrina francesa en el campo de movimientos de tierras y pavimentos. En 2002 fue nombrado secretario general de la Asociación Mundial de la Carretera, PIARC, y en la que trabajó hasta abril de 2016. Durante su gestión fue responsable de la organización de los Congresos Mundiales de la Carretera en Durban, París, Ciudad de México y Seúl, los cuales tuvieron un gran éxito. Es responsable del curso de carreteras de la Escuela Nacional de Puentes, preside una comisión franco-italiana que supervisa los contratos del proyecto del túnel ferroviario bajo los Alpes del tramo Lyon-Turín y continúa colaborando con la PIARC como miembro de la Comisión del Plan Estratégico y coordinador del tema estratégico de seguridad. Dos cosas antes de comenzar. Primero, la conferencia está planeada para darse en inglés. Quiero por favor pedirles que levanten la mano a aquellos que estén de acuerdo con esto, con que se dé en inglés. Porque la alternativa sería que hiciéramos una traducción secuenciada, pero eso pues nos llevaría el doble de tiempo. Entonces, parece que hay una mayoría para que sí sea en inglés. ¿Quieren volverla a levantar, por favor? Bueno, la dejamos entonces en inglés. También les quiero comentar que la conferencia se va a transmitir por streaming, entonces les quiero pedir que por favor reservemos las preguntas para el final y que pues ahí las desahoguemos. Bueno, sin más, Jean-François, por favor, muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Ricardo, por sus palabras muy es un honor y placer para mí estar de nuevo en el instituto que visité dos veces antes. El ingeniero Roberto Gerber me ofreció tratar del tema de los retos en la gestión de activos de la infraestructura carretera. Lamentablemente mi español no es tan bueno para desarrollar tal ponencia. Como dice Ricardo, voy a hablar en inglés ahora mismo. At the beginning of this presentation, I will first define the scope of the presentation. And what I'm not going to talk about is about technology of road materials or technology for the equipment plan, although because there have been over the last decades a lot of progress made in this area, and we now have a wide range of solutions because of progress on bitumen, modification of bitumen, on mixes. We have a large range of mixes, both hot and cold mixes for different kinds of repair works. And there has been also a very large progress in the area of progress with the technology of recycling. So I personally consider that we now have a wide range of solutions to address the different problems for maintenance of pavements. So this is probably not in this area that we are facing the most important challenges in the area of management of road assets. So I will concentrate on other aspects, and I will define now more precisely what I'm going to talk about. When we speak of asset management, I found here two definitions which have been produced rather recently. The first one is from the International Transport Forum, which says that the overall aim of asset management is to optimize the service level delivered by infrastructure over its life cycle. And the focus of management should be on value to users or customers, and not solely, nor even primarily, on cost or asset replacement cost perceived by the infrastructure provider. And I have also quoted another definition coming from the UK, which is probably a bit more precise, or defining asset management as a systematic approach to meeting the strategy need for the management and maintenance of highway infrastructure assets through long-term planning and optimal allocation of resources in order to manage risk and meet the performance requirements of the authority in the most efficient and sustainable manner. Traditionally, the asset management approach has been mainly with the asset itself, but the important trend is that now there is more emphasis on the users, on the estimate of what is the user's demand. And what this chart, which comes also from another report from the UK, is highlighting that asset management has to be a dynamic approach, because you have to take into consideration the interaction between what you define as the service level targets that comes from the assessment of the needs for the users and the management objective and strategy. So you have periodically to reassess what is the demand, and from this assessment of the demand, then you might decide whether there is a need for expansion of your assets, or if it's a matter of improving or redefining what is the service level targets. So it's, as I say, now the trend is moving away from a purely infrastructure condition-based approach towards a service-based approach for managing road networks. However, this is a very large aspect, and within this one presentation, find not possible to try to address these different aspects. So I will focus and reduce the scope of the presentation to the consideration of the issue of maintenance of the road assets, as asset condition is a key parameter of performance. So this will not address all what is meaningful to asset management, but I will focus on this issue of maintenance. This problem of maintenance is a global one, and it has been an all-time issue, more or less always the same, or how to do with no or very little money. This came from the French painter, and taking the example of France in the 18th century, sorry. Well, the king decided to introduce what he calls the royal corvée, as he was spending money on wars, building palaces and so on, and there was not enough money for maintaining the roads. So what they decided is to introduce royal corvée, which means that the peasants in the countryside, they had to work for free for some days in the years to maintain the road. But of course, this system had little success and didn't work for a long time because people were not, of course, very enthusiastic. The quality of the work was not very good, and it was not an efficient system. So what they decided at that time is, instead of having this royal corvée, is to create a new tax. So get money from people, and then use this money and pay people for working to maintain roads. And so what they introduced by the end of the 18th century, what we call system of canton, that is between two villages, and in France the distances are not so far. So they would award a contract to local people, who would be paid for that to ensure road maintenance. Later on, the maintenance was done in-house, but this by cantonniers who were then civil servants, and this system worked until the 20th century. And why did it work? Because until the first half of the 20th century, almost all the roads were gravel roads. So maintenance was, they had to maintain the ditches, and they had to bring material to fill the potholes. So it was possible to do this manually. And it was a good system to have people who were there the whole year in charge of a limited section, because they could do the maintenance when it was needed. But of course, now with our modern pavements, where the thick asphalt layers, it's impossible now to consider that manual work could work efficiently. So we had to move away from this old system of organization of maintenance. So we have to find a new solution for that. This question, the question of maintenance and backlog in maintenance is unfortunately a world issue. This is why in 2015 we called for a conference in Paris about pavement preservation and recycling summit, in order to bring attention of decision makers about the importance of maintenance. And in the opening speech that I made, lecture that I made, I used quotes from newspapers from all around the world, and in this slide, I added one taken from Excelsior from last month. So the problem is still here in 2018, what is interesting, I think, showing all these parts of newspapers, is that population is very sensitive to the issue of road maintenance and condition of the roads, because it affects their everyday life. So what on this slide, so we'll have the structure of my presentation. I will first say a few words about the issue of placing transport back on the agenda. Then where are we now? And making the case of maintenance. Then I will go into more technical aspects, that is acting for preservation of the assets, the issue of funding, and in the last section, maybe introducing some questioning about the form of organization for operation and maintenance of the national roads network. Why talking about placing transport back on the agenda? Because at the turn of this century, we were in a situation where a number of people conveyed the message that roads are bad and there's too much money that is being spent on road infrastructure. And this is, for instance, reflecting at the UN level in the important document that was produced by the UN about the Millennium Development Goals, which was published in 2000. And if you read this document, you will not find a single word about transport. The word transport only appears once in relation to landlocked developing countries. And this had a very important consequence, that it led to a revision of the agenda of the World Bank and all the regional banks. And they changed their priorities by the turn of the century, reducing significantly the investment and the efforts made in the transport sector, and road sector in particular. Fortunately, there has been a change which took place about 12 years later. And if you refer to another UN report, that is the Rio Plus 20, published in 2012, now they say, we know that transportation and mobility are central to sustainable development. That's considerable change. Sustainable transportation can enhance economic growth and improve accessibility. Sustainable transport achieves better integration of the economy while respecting the environment. And this change in mindset, you can find it in the new new program, that's an approach taken by the UN with the Sustainable Development Goals. And although transport does not appear as a goal in itself, it clearly appears as part, as a necessity to achieve results in a number of these Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, because good road contribute to these SDGs, as for access to education, access to health, building effective institutions, or also in relation to combat to climate change, sustainable development growth, build resilient infrastructure, and make cities resilient. So I think now there has been a change. Also change in the program of the multilateral banks. So we are in a better situation to make the case about the importance of sustainable transport. So where are we now? If we look at the history about over the last decades, in fact, large investments have been made in high-income countries from the 60s about. So it's only 50 to 60 years ago. And it's, of course, going on emerging countries and countries in transition in order to develop a modern road transport system with highways and upgrading to new standards existing main roads. The pavements that we are building now, or started to build a few decades ago, are built now for a service life of maybe 20 to 40 years or sometimes more. And when we build them, and if we build them and design them correctly, the need for major maintenance work does not appear, fortunately, immediately, but maybe after 7 to 12 years or more. But this time difference has, Other important aspect to note is that with these new, with these modern roads, we are building an asset with a very high value. Taken again the example of France, we have a total road network of about 1 million kilometers. This represents a value of 250 billion US dollars. That is approximately 0.9 France GDP. And if we look at the national road network, which is directly managed overseen by the responsibility under the responsibility of the state, which represent 20,000 kilometers, it's worth about 250 billion US dollars. That is about 2/3 of the state tangible assets. So it's considerable assets that's represented by the road network. The problem is that we have a large but neglected aging stock, which is the result of a lack of anticipation. Because there was no immediate resource to make repairs when we build new assets. And people don't think of that the needs will come later, and resources for maintenance have not been increased in relation to the growth of assets and aging of the stock. And this, I think, not only the case of France, but in many countries, and probably also the case in Mexico. Looking at some figures I took from the US, in a report issued by the White House in 2014, they were stating that 65% of major roads were rated in less than good condition, and 1 out of 4 of bridges, of the 600,000 bridges, need significant repairs. This lack of anticipation, you can see it from figures produced, for instance, by the International Transport Forum, which shows the public road maintenance expenditure as a share of the total road expenditure. So here is that's percentage, and different groups of OECD or European countries and the US. And about 20 years ago, it was in the range of 30%, and we see that it has even been reduced. So what we see that what is being spent in the world for maintenance remains as the same share as total road expenditure, although the assets is continuing to grow. This problem cannot be seen from this graph, which shows the evolution of road transport investment. So that's the green light, and what is being spent on road maintenance over the period from 1995 to 2011. And you see that these curves are, looks very similar, which means that the trend is only reflected by the context, the economical context. You see, when things were getting better for the global economy until the crisis of 2007, then we were spending more money in investment and a bit small money in maintenance. And after that, both are being affected in the same way. That is, people, although they will create less new assets, they are still reducing the amount of money being spent on maintenance. When we look at figures which are produced internationally, it's a bit difficult to understand clearly what is being spent and what the money is being used. And usually you just find one figure for capital expenditure, but it would be much better if in the figures of capital expenditure we could differentiate between expenditure for expanding the capacity of the road network, that is new roads or adding adding lanes, and expenditure for rehabilitation and large repairs. And this, we can't see it clearly from the figures which are being produced all around the world. Making the case for maintenance. So a large public asset to maintain, but still few local politicians hear the importance of preservation of the road assets. And often it's the result of, okay, there are some more cracks, but you can still ride on the road. So let's see later, we can consider this problem later. And we get to the cut the ribbon and run problem, which is universal. Here I took some picture from the internet from Mexico. Of course, we can understand that everybody can be very proud of making new investment, but the problem is that we don't see all these politicians back on the road when you have just resurfaced the road and maintain it correctly. This is well described in this quote about deferring maintenance, which is usually a handy expedient for public officials faced with problems in balancing their budgets. There are significant fiscal and political incentives for public officials to defer maintenance in good times as well as bad. And those benefits lead them to overlook basic common sense and responsible management. And we'll see that more in detail. So I think how there is a need to change the mindset and continue the drive for the change in the mindset. And for that, we have to speak to the public, address social expectations to influence the decisions. And if we want to be successful, we should make this problem issue a social economic case and not speak just about preserving the asset itself. I think this was there is an interesting report produced by the Department of Transport of the United Kingdom called Action for Roads, in which, in part of this report, they explain why road matters. And what they speak is about what are the benefits, the social and economic benefits of roads. And our road networks supports all our daily lives, and everyone in the UK has benefited from the investment made since the 50s. Roads get us to work, give us access to the goods and services we need, but it also connects us with family and friends. That's important to everyone. And also, there is other aspects related here to economy, the importance of good road network for just in supporting the economy. Oops. But there are not so many reports that tries to present figures in relation to the importance of and the consequences of insufficiency in road maintenance. I took these figures from a report produced by in the US by the AC that states that in 2010 it was estimated that deficiency in America's surface transport system cost households and businesses nearly $130 billion US. By comparison, this is what the US state and local governments are spending annually is about the same amount of money, 168 billion on roads, on highway and roads. In England, there was a study that showed that poor condition of local roads are costing small and medium-sized enterprises approximately £5 billion each year through operational inefficiency, production delays, raw materials, and produce delivery delays, and vehicle repair costs. Another interesting way to look at what might be the consequences of deferring maintenance was a study performed by Transport Scotland just a few years ago, when they investigated different scenarios, saying that, okay, let's save some money, for instance, 40% of the budget of maintenance. We reduce this public expenditure by 40%. But the consequence of this reduction of maintenance, of deferring maintenance, is that this one, if you think that you are, if you're saving £1, in fact, it costs 1.5 in quantifiable cost to society. So deferring maintenance is not a saving, but for society, it's an additional cost. Okay. So from an asset preservation perspective, deferral of maintenance work results in increasing backlog between the available resources and the actual needs. You all know that we'll get also high costs of rehabilitation because degradations in the pavements accelerate further degradation. So it's not a linear problem if you think of deferring. Don't know what happens. Yeah, and also it leads to least efficiency of use of public funds, or as decisions about roadworks become, when you have little money, they're largely determined by emergency situations and reconstruction cost, often perversely taking up funds slated for maintenance. So that's also a very important consequence in terms of managing the assets and making good use of public money. Don't know what happens when this. Can you move to the following slide? Okay. An example taken this time from Spain, from the Association of Contractors in Spain, where they made an assessment of the current situation of the road network and the need for repair works both at the national and regional level, and you see that the trend is a very large increase in the investment needs because of the poor situation of the condition of the network. Next. So I think all these elements that we have now and which are available from a number of countries says that clearly deferred maintenance is a disinvestment, and we must act in a responsible way. And this is being developed in a report that was produced by a few years ago by the World Road Association about preservation of roads. Next. And why do we say, do I say we must act in a responsible way? Because inadequate maintenance affects not only the present generation, but it places undue financial burden on future generations. So this is the kind of message that we have to convey about the importance of preserving the road infrastructure network. Next, please. But if we want to advocate for adequate resources, we should not forget that the final decisions are being made by local politicians, the people who are elected, which is normal. So we cannot be successful in convincing them to invest more money for maintenance without building trust between road managers and the elected politicians. And what do I mean by building trust? I mean transparency, creating ownership and accountability. Why? About transparency, if you expect them to make decisions, then you have to provide fair and complete information on the impact of the choices. You have to give them different scenarios with the consequences. Okay, I select option A, but in that case, I cannot do everything, and these are the consequences of this scenario. There must be also a definition of a set and measurable objectives of the road network condition over the coming years. If you say, I need more money to do that, then you have also to be in a situation where you can say what will be the expected condition. Second aspect is creating ownership. The objectives that you can define and present, they have to be also become those of the governing body. Not only yours, but also those of the governing body. And this leads to the last aspect about accountability. That is, you have to be in a situation where you can report every year on the actual condition versus the objectives to assess the efficiency of the pavement preservation strategy which has been implemented. And I think all these aspects are essential in building the relationship between the agency or in charge of management of the road asset and the elected politician, if we want to make the case and act in a responsible way. Next. So now let's see different aspects of assets preservation and acting for asset preservation. Next slide. Next. Next. So the first aspect is about the inventory and condition of the road assets. You first, of course, need to have data on condition of the different elements of the road assets and their evolution. But for this is probably the easiest part now, because we have methodologies, there are tools that exist all around the world to provide quality information about pavement, condition of pavement, bridges, tunnels, signage, roadside equipment. So it's possible to make such inventory and assess the condition. Next. There are still some difficulties, mainly for embankments, retaining walls, drainage, to define the condition. Next. When you have this individual data, then the following step is aggregation of individual data into condition indicators. And for this, there are also methodologies which exist and which are being used. This is not too much of a problem. Next. Next, yeah. But what is a bit more challenging is converting this information into monetary terms, which we'll see is the important step for the following. Next. So, for instance, in France, we introduced about over 20 years ago, a rating system of pavement condition, quality image of the national network, which is directly linked to the cost of the repair work to restore good condition. So at the same time that you're assessing the condition, structural condition and of the pavement, then we can derive an indication of the cost of depreciation, well, the depreciation of the asset if there has been any change from 1 year to the next. Next. So I come here to the second aspect, that is valuation of road infrastructure assets using accumulated condition-based depreciation. And this is being stated by OECD as the most useful indicator which is being used and is the best summary descriptor of the long-term performance of the road network. Next. Valuation of road assets is not that old. Pioneer work seems to have been made by Australia and New Zealand in the 90s. It is still not generalized, but there is a trend for expanding largely the use of valuation. For instance, it's being now used in Canada, even at municipal level. Next. Next. So current condition for valuation is to adopt the depreciated replacement cost, that is current cost of replacing an asset with its modern equivalent, minus the deductions for all physical deterioration and impairment. Next. 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 So annual depreciation is calculated by identifying all the capital treatments needed to maintain assets or key components over their life cycles, and then spreading the total cost evenly over the number of years in the life cycle. Next. So calculated in this way, annual depreciation not only represents the annual consumption of service benefits, but it also provides a measure of what, on average, needs to be spent year to year to maintain the assets in a steady state. So this quote is from the PIARC Road Asset Management Manual that has been produced recently by the World Road Association, and which is accessible on the internet website. Next. Yeah, what when we're talking of valuation of road assets, what is interesting is not to have the absolute value, but what is useful is to be in a situation where you can monitor the change in value, that is the depreciation, possible depreciation of the assets. But if you want to do this, that your approach must be repeatable and consistent for a number of reasons. First of all, if you look at the situation at national network, usually data come from different people or different agencies or services, and you have to consolidate the inputs. So you have to have a good reproducibility of your system. Next. And so if you want to make meaningful comparisons from year to year, if you see a change, it shouldn't be a change in your thermometer, but the change should reflect the actual change and the condition of your network. This might be a trivial statement, but in practice, this is not trivial at all. And in particular, next, you have to make sure that data collection on condition of the road assets must be repeatable and consistent. And you must be aware of the scatter of your data when you make successive collection of data. Well, once you have a good idea of good data of the condition, unfortunately, you will not be in a position to solve the problem in 1 year. So the backlog cannot be reduced in 1 year. So you can only correct the system over a certain period of time, hopefully. If you want to do that, then what you need also is to have a multi-annual vision and approach to road assets management. Next. So it's necessary for the road owner to recover control on the evolution of the condition of the network. Also to rationalize intervention programs and make more efficient use of public money. But what is also interesting is to underline that it's also important for road industry. If the government can provide a vision that is that you can trust, then also the road industry can also plan investment in equipment, invest in training of qualified staff, and this can also only be done if you have a few years vision ahead. Next. So, as prerequisite to the definition of multi-annual strategy, you have first to set objective to the service condition of the roads. And as you will not have enough money to treat all the roads equally, then you have to define different service levels, and you should do that according to the social economical interest of the roads. And this is a first prerequisite to the definition of a multi-annual strategy. Next. And this is where also one should introduce the use of risk. Risk identification and assessment should be integrating in this approach. Should answer which assets in my network are critical to the functioning of the network. What could affect the delivery of the required performance? What is the acceptable of risk? What are the options to mitigate those risks deemed unacceptable? And this analysis should be done when you are defining objectives for making different classes of your road networks with different sets of objectives. And this is where risk analysis should be introduced, which is very not largely being done now. This is really one area where research is needed and where there is a need for progress in towards the objective of defining service levels of in the road networks. Next. Another prerequisite, if you want to have a multi-annual strategy, you have to be in a situation where you can forecast the evolution of your network. So for that, there is a need for pavement deterioration models in order to determine the evolution of performance with time and also the effect of repair works. This is usually done based on historical data, what you know, what has been in the past, the condition and the evolution of the condition of your work, and using usually Markov chains to produce, have an idea of the probability of evolution of the condition of the network. This is easier done for, I would say, the standard traditional flexible pavements, and it's still challenging for thick asphalt, semi-rigid and rigid pavements, where I still think that research is still needed to have better ideas of deterioration models. Next. So, if suppose that we have these deterioration models, and we can then have different strategies, different scenarios, and see what will be the evolution of the condition of the network. Now you have to relate this change in condition to the development of a financial plan for the medium and long term. And when this financial plan or business plan is presented to those the decision makers and these local politicians, then the business case should, as I said before, provide clear indication of on the impacts of the choice which will be made between the different options which will be presented for the financial plan. So impacts on the road users' benefits. What can you expect in terms of traffic disruption, users' cost, socioeconomic and environmental effects, and also on asset performance, that's evaluated in terms of the likely drop in performance value for condition and safety, and finally on depreciation of the road assets. Now, how to make a decision between the different options? Then usually what often people speak is about selecting the optimum. What is the optimum? Usually the optimization problem is defined as traditionally involving a trading off road agency cost against road users cost over time. And in this approach now, at the optimum, the marginal benefit cost ratio, that is the present value of the benefit to users from spending an additional present value of $1 on maintenance, is equal to 1. But this is clear theory, but from a practical point of view, it's theory. One reason for that is the relation to users' cost to the condition of the road is very difficult to establish, especially with modern pavements. It was done, and it is still done for traditional pavements, in particular HDM model. You can do that, because when you have gravel roads, then when the number of batches increases, then you have to slow down, so you can relate to some the condition of the road to users' cost. But when you have modern pavements, when deterioration is mainly with cracks, then the cracks will not affect the speed of you travel. So how do you find the user's cost? Usually it's more related to the consequences in terms of disruption in traffic, when you have to close some lanes for repair works, but it's very difficult to define a reliable way of estimating the user's cost. So what is done mostly is taking the alternative approach of minimizing the present value of the road agency costs subject to the minimum standard constraint. That is, what would be acceptable to users. In this case, you are defining certain objectives of condition of the road, and then you are assessing what is the amount of money and how you can get to this condition, to these objectives, with a minimum expenditure for the road agency. Usually with the available funds, the same standards can't be achieved on the whole network, which implies, as mentioned before, to categorize subsets of the network, each with different standards of condition. Next. This slide is taken from a very recent piece of work which was ordered by the French government as an audit of the French non-considered national road network, which is represent about 20 1,000 kilometers directly operated and maintained by the French administration. The first scenario is keeping the budget allocated to maintenance that was allocated in 2017 and keep it constant over the coming 20 years. This budget is currently 265 million euros. That's not for the operation and ordinary maintenance. That's for the repairs and preventive maintenance and repairs. And here the two graphs here at the top shows that with this budget for the first group of roads which represent the most important ones of the network, so it's possible to improve the overall condition of the network and reducing in particular significantly over 20 years the percentage of roads of payments in bad conditions. But if adopting this strategy and this share of money between this first group and the third group with the least the roads with the least socio-economic importance, we see that you are in a situation you cannot have control of the deterioration of this group of roads. So with this amount of money, well, condition could be improved with this part of the network, but with significant degradation of the rest of the network. And scenario B, which was analyzed, was allocating approximately 100 million euros, 1/3 more of the budget for 10 years, and using 45% of this amount of money for preventive maintenance and 55% for curative works. In that case, the mean rate of renewal of pavements will be about 7.1%. In that case, you see, with this amount of money, it's possible, and this strategy, then you can both at the same time bring all important roads to a state of good condition in approximately 10 years and keep under control the condition of the other group of roads and keep the level of roads in poor condition for the least important roads to about 20 to 25%, 20%. So this is the kind of study which can be currently done and which can be helpful to make final decision about the amount of money which will be allocated. Next. Next aspect about funding. And funding certainty does matter. It can be seen as a trivial statement, but we'll see that it's not that trivial. Okay, next. What I think we suffer mostly all around the world from the horizon of annual budget. And this horizon of annual budget is, to me, a severe limitation and prevent, in practice, adoption of an actual multi-annual strategy. One I discussed some years ago with the director in charge of maintenance about these aspects of multi-annual strategy. He said, why should I care of multi-annual planning? The current resources that I get are used to face emergency situations. So this is often the kind of reaction that we have and that we have to change. And this annual budget horizon to which short-term fluctuations are associated have some bad consequences if you have short-term fluctuations. So in a number of cases, you have to stop some project and start again them later, which introduces additional costs. It boosts also focus on finishing the next project without considering long-term vision. And thirdly, and I think that's also, to me, a very important problem, it degrades seriously accountability of road management agencies. If you want to be you can be accountable if you have control on the means that are given to you to achieve the objectives that have been decided. But if you set objectives over a number of years, and if you don't, at some time, you don't have the appropriate amount of funding, how you won't be able to achieve the objectives. Then how is your accountability? Next. Oh yes. What has been done in the UK is they introduced 5 years certainty and funding certainty for at least 5 years in capital budget makes it possible to make a sensitive provision for the development of a pipeline of future work, ensuring continuity in investment. And again, it also provides some certainty to industry to invest in training of staff and equipment. This is another quote from this report, Action for Roads, from the UK Department for Transport that I mentioned before. Last aspect that I will address in this presentation is by questioning the form of organization for operation and maintenance of the national road network. This aspect is currently very high on the agenda in France. Of course, operating, maintaining, and enhancing the network effectively is crucial to economic performance. But with large public deficits, which is the case in many countries, governments tend to reduce budget allocation for roads, but at the same time they're setting efficiency targets and often reducing the number of staff. In this context, running the road network by the civil service with uncertainties of annual budget does not provide the adequate framework for implementation of long-term strategy in the interest of the users and the taxpayers. With this, I don't mean that the state should no longer have interest in the road network. Definitely, the state should maintain responsibility over the strategic part of the road network, in particular to ensure 24/7 availability and service, but the organization structure to achieve this for operations and maintenance should probably change from its standard form. Next. And one, I think, interesting example is that of Highways England, which was established recently in 2015. What they did at that time is to establish a legally separate government-owned company. So we're not talking about privatization, but we're talking of establishing a government-owned company, but separated from the Secretary of State of Transport, but the Secretary of State of Transport remaining as the sole shareholder of this company. Giving this company the legal powers and duty to operate, manage, maintain, and enhance the network with a system of governance closer to what is being with the private companies, giving the road operator the daily independence and flexibility needed to act effectively, and also independence on the larger independence from the Secretary of State of Transport for the decisions that they're making. But if you give this freedom, on the other side, then you have to define how the company or the agency should be accountable. And they define the highway agency as being fully accountable not only to the Department of Transport, but also to the Parliament and to road users. And on the side of the Department for Transport, they established a road investment strategy with a long-term funding guarantee, a defined funding and investment plan, in fact over 5 years and being revised every 5 years, together with performance requirements and delivery expectations to be met by the Highway England. So here we have a clear separation of a definition of the responsibility. The Secretary for Transport has still the responsibility of defining the objectives. What do I want as condition for the network? They keep responsibility of that. But responsibility of what do I do to reach this objective is on Highway England. And Highway England is reporting about if they meet this objective or not. And in terms of accountability, so they introduce also a system of external scrutiny, to represent the interests of all those who use and rely upon the high strategic road network, and to monitor the efficiency and performance of Highway England. So there are some form of auditing, which is external, which comprises representative of road users, of industry, and so on. This leads us to some concluding remarks on the different aspects that I covered during this presentation. I think I mentioned that there has been, throughout the world, some form of change in the mindset, and people are getting more aware of the importance of a good and sustainable road infrastructure. However, there is a need to continue the drive for change. Next. And for that, we should make the case of road preservation as a social issue, not a technical one, a social issue. And encourage for that citizens, but also industry, to make their voice heard, and put pressure on politicians for long-term decision, ensuring sustainability for the sake also of our children. Next. We should reinforce communication to all stakeholders about the condition and the value of the road infrastructure, the economic impact of delayed maintenance and preservation of the roads. In the case of France, on this matter, for instance, there has been a decision to make accessible on the internet information about the condition of the network, so that there can be a discussion. People know what is the assessment of the road condition, and this is a useful tool in the dialogue with government. Pursue implementation of road asset management to improve decision-making, provide transparency, and promote accountability, and advocate for appropriate funding. Next. Research is still needed in a number of areas. And one of them is the development of degradation models pertinent to local national conditions. I would add to that what I mentioned before about risk assessment, introduction of risk analysis in assessing the infrastructure, and helping making decisions about the objectives of condition. Next. So integrate risk management, including consideration also of climate change impacts in road asset management. Develop specific approaches to deal with management of the bridge stock as part of the whole road assets management strategy and plan. I didn't talk about bridges here, and the approach to bridges is fairly different from that that can be used from the pavement, but at the same time we need also to have a comparable approach to bridges. Can we go back to previous slide? Okay, next. Sorry. I also think that there is a need for innovation in contracting maintenance. Looking at multi-annual performance-based maintenance contracts, I know that some have been used in Mexico. A lot of discussion going on about efficiency of this maintenance contract, and it's not that very often throughout the world. It's being used in Finland for the National Road Network, and there's probably a need to continue to investigate in close relation with the private sector how to develop balanced contracts, which is, I think, the difficult aspect in defining equitable multi-annual performance-based contracts. And finally, examine the potential of an evolution of state organization in charge of maintenance and operation of the strategic road network, perhaps with a move towards a public operator which would have mid-term funding guarantee and an agile structure fully accountable to the government and the stakeholders. Next. This last slide shows the homepage of the PIAC Road Asset Management Manual, which can be accessed from PIAC website and or directly through this address, which provides a comprehensive information about the different aspects of road assets management and provides numerous references to